My name is Sabrina Marquez, and I will be reviewing the City of Anaheim in terms of their transportation. The objective of this presentation is to understand the ways that Anaheim is utilizing their transportation and ways in which they can improve upon them. A general overview of this assignment will examine current transportation and information about how they're utilizing transportation, and then lastly, it'll take a deep dive into ways that the city can improve their transportation into a more sustainable direction. So this slide is looking at the data, the current data of the transportation sector. In Figure 2, you can see the transportation modes that people have taken in the years 2006 to 2010. As you can see, about 140,000 people are using cars or trucks or vans to commute to work. And this is the most mode, or the majority mode of transportation that commuters are using. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the transportation sector contributes to the most greenhouse gas emissions in Anaheim, and there's a clear need for alternative forms of transportation. So there are a few ways that Anaheim is currently moving in a sustainable direction. The first is that they are starting this pilot program that is a rideshare program for underprivileged communities that live in affordable housing. And so the way that it works is that a property can pay for an electric vehicle to be on property, and then the city will reimburse them. So it is at no cost to the property and no cost to the residents there. And the idea is that these residents who may not be able to afford a car can use electric vehicles, which is a more sustainable way to commute to different places, such as appointments and grocery shopping. They are able to use this program in order to live their daily lives. Another way that Anaheim is moving in a sustainable direction is that they have this electric vehicle that works kind of like a Lyft, and it's called Free Rides Around the Neighborhood, or FRAN for short. And the way that it works is that you can use the app, kind of again like Uber and Lyft, to pick you up from a certain stop and take you to another stop. And there are currently about 18 stops, and they're always updating more stops and trying to add more stops so that people can use this to get around downtown Anaheim. So I thought of a few ways that the city can move in a more sustainable direction. And driving around the city, I noticed that there weren't very many bike lanes that were in place. And there's many good benefits of having the bike lanes in place. It allows automobiles and cyclists to coexist safely together. It's a more sustainable mode of transportation, and it's actually a healthier option for people to use in order to commute to work or other places. And it also provides multimodal environments and communities because there is usage of bikes and automobiles, and it allows cyclists to be away from the automobiles and from pedestrians as well. And then another kind of idea is that the city can put in bike share programs. And so this is kind of similar to that EV program that they already are starting to have in place. Bike share programs are an alternative option to automobiles. They're more cost effective in terms of tourism. So people that come to Anaheim, which it is a big tourist area because there's Disneyland, there's downtown Anaheim that has a lot of shops and places to eat. And so it's a high tourist area, and this is a more cost-effective way instead of renting a car. And it's obviously more sustainable than renting a car, so that people can kind of get around and enjoy the city. It also provides another way for people to use bicycles to get around the city without having to purchase or own a personal bike. So my personal experience with sustainable transportation is that in college I used a combination of busing and biking, both to work and to school. I tried to live close to school in different times while I was in college, to bus and bike or even walk. I also took advantage of a bus program with the school that allowed me to have a bus pass, and I could use the bus a limited amounts of time. My favorite way to use sustainable transportation around the city is to use the Fran, like I've discussed earlier in this presentation. It's a great way to get around. You can get to the post office, local shops, restaurants. You can even get to City Hall, different parks, and even grocery shopping. So there are various ways that Anaheim respects urban fabrics, but also ways that they can improve. For the walking urban fabric, there is great walking infrastructure in place in downtown Anaheim. There's limited parking at the park, and what I really like about the park and its parking structure is there is no parking lot, but around the perimeter of the park there are angled parking spots, and so this really limits parking around the park and increases walking. Like I've said, there's limited parking in downtown areas. One thing that I wanted to discuss with the class is the idea of parking garages. So they kind of replace building horizontally large parking lots, but by building vertically, you're also increasing the amount of cars that can be in a parking lot. So is this something that can help sustainable transportation, or is this kind of the same way that contributes to automobile dependence? That would be something that I would like to discuss with the class. So there are long lights for crossing and many crosswalks and stop signs. There are smaller streets in downtown Anaheim, but mostly in residential areas, and the houses have setbacks, so there are no garages in front of the houses and big yards in front of the houses. However, this does increase street parking, and it can be really unsafe with them being already smaller streets and having a lot of cars parked. It just gets really hard to see around corners to see oncoming traffic. Downtown Anaheim also has a great use of mixed uses. There are downtown lofts as well as different retail shops and public entities like the post office and City Hall. So the transit urban fabric needs drastic improvements. They need to make wider roads for transit, not wider roads for cars. So when I've driven down larger streets, major streets in Anaheim, I have noticed that there is no side way that the buses can take in order to safely get out of traffic and pick up patrons on the side of the road, and they just stop in the middle of traffic, which increases congestion. I've also noticed that there aren't many bus stops around the city, and it's harder for people to get around and get dropped off close to their destination, so there definitely needs to be more transit in the city center. So the automobile fabric needs a lot of improvement as well. They need to improve transit infrastructure first if they're going to improve densities and mixed uses in city centers. And they need this because larger downtown areas need more access to public transit in order to limit car dependence. There's also no incentives to stop using cars. There are a lot of wide roads with several lanes. Downtown areas get crowded fast because people choose to drive, and this kind of goes back to the parking garage situation that I wanted to talk about. But people aren't using public transit or walking or biking to these downtown areas. They're still choosing to come to these areas. And I also think that kind of comes from lack of bus stops. If people are driving from far distances to get to downtown Anaheim, since it is a more tourist area, people aren't trying to figure out other ways besides using their cars to get there. There's also a lot of strip malls with major parking lots. There's a lot of them around the city, and that definitely contributes to automobile dependence. Overall, there's a lot of different things that Anaheim is doing, like the EV program, as well as the Fran, that really helps with sustainable transportation. However, there are still a lot of improvements that the city can make to move forward in a more sustainable direction.